ज्ञानञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। मुखं करोति वाचालं पंगुं लंघयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुदीनतारिणं परमानन्दं माधवम्। We were in the 8th chapter of the 4th canto, titled Dhruva Maharaj Leaves Home for the Forest. And I think we had just done the first verse. And this is a continuation of the description of the dynasty of Swayambhavu Manu. Previous chapter had ended with the yagya of Prajapati Daksha. So that was one branch of the dynasty. Their daughter Prasuti had married Prajapati Daksha, and Sati was the daughter. So that pastime was described. The focus now moves back to the sons of Swayambhavu Manu. And as mentioned, that initially Maitreya will speak about Utanpad. Actually, in the complete 4th canto, is all the way till the end of the 4th canto, is a description of the dynasty of Maharaj Utanpad. And then the 5th canto, 15 chapters talk about the descendants of Prevarta. So Maitreya had spoken how amongst the sons of Brahma, there were 9 sons that did not marry, and he mentions them to indicate while they were sons. He is not talking about their lineage because they were Naishtik Brahmachari and they did not have any descendants. Then he starts speaking about another son of Brahma by the name of Adharma, irreligion, whose wife's name was Damba, falsity. So we had finished this discussion and we'll start from verse 3. Tayo sammavallobha nekritascha mahamate tabhyam krodhascha himsa cha yadrukti swasakalihi. Maitreya told Vidur, O great soul, from Damba and Maya were born greed and nikriti, or cunning. From their combination came children named Krodha, anger, and Himsa, envy. And from their combination were born Kali and his sister Durukti, harsh speech. So 3 generations are described here. In all the 3 generations, the commonality is that the son and the daughter that are born, the brother and sister, they marry each other, and they have a son and daughter, and they marry each other. So previously we saw that Adharma and Mrisha, they married to produce Dambha and Maya. Dambha and Maya were adopted by Nirti. And when they married, then they had Krodha and Himsa as their children. So I'm sorry, they had Lobha and Nikriti as children. So Nikriti means cunning or deceit. And the sister of Nikriti was Lobha, or material greed. So Nikriti is being ungrateful, putting others into troublesome situations, painful situations. Lobha is intense desire. So when they married each other, they had a son and a daughter named Krodh and Himsa, anger and envy. So anger also means being intolerant. And envy means also killing and destroying. So they also married each other and had a son by the name of Kali, quarrel. So this is not the Kali that is the personification of Kali Yuga, but basically the original personality of quarrel, Kali. And his sister was Durukti. Durukti is harsh speech. So Kali does not just mean quarreling, even though it's one of the symptoms, but Kali actually means having a separatist mentality of trying to push others away, trying to make divisions. And this is something that is condemned through the Bhagavatam. In Canto 3, we see Lord Kapila roundly condemning the separatist mentality. He keeps saying, a separatist acts like that, separatist. This is chapter 13, Canto 3. Then Lord Brahma, in his praise to Lord Shiva, he condemns separatist mentality. 4th Canto, 6th chapter. So 3 verses he speaks, Prathakdrishya, Prasakdrishya, the person who has a discriminatory vision. And then Sati Devi, when she was chastising her father, Prajapati Daksha, she was condemning the separatist mentality, 4th Canto, 4th chapter. And that is essentially what Kali implies. So this impious tradition of marrying one's sister, it appears throughout in the lineage of Adharma. And incest is not just between siblings, but it is also between parents and children. And there are, in the current day and age, there are more and more cases of daughters suffering abuse at the hands of their father or parental figures. And all these are symptoms of adharma. They were earlier unheard of. And now there are more and more of these cases happening. Now, we have to also consider the fact that the Bhagavatam also notes the marriage between brother and sister between elevated personalities. For instance, Akuti, the first daughter of Swayambhava Manu, she had a son and a daughter by the name of Yagya and Dakshini. And they married each other. But in the Bhagavatam, it is clearly said that Yagya was an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, and Dakshini was an incarnation of Lakshmi Devi. Right? So even though they were born of the same parents, but the understanding is that they simply came through the media of the parents while preserving their original position. Similarly, we see Prithu Maharaj and Archi. They both came from the body of King Vena, and they married. And we see the example of Swayambhu, Manu, and Shatrupa. They both came from Brahma and they married. But in all these circumstances, it is mentioned that they came through the media. So Swayambhu, Manu, and Shatrupa, they came through Brahma, just like Rudra comes through Brahma. They did not have a seminal birth, unlike the descendants of Adharma. Next verse. Druktir kaliradat bhayam mrityum cha sattam tayoscha mithunam jajne yatna nirayas tatha. O greatest of all good men, by the combination of Kali and harsh speech were born children named Mrityu, death, and Bhiti, fear. From the combination of Mrityu and Bhiti came children named Yatna, excessive pain, and Niraya, hell. So Kali is the personification of the quality of the separatist quality, the quality of quarrel. Bhaya is considered as masculine, and Mrityu is considered as feminine. So even though it's not explicitly said, but the understanding is that Bhaya was the son and Mrityu was the daughter. So quick summary. So I've also put this in a table. Prem Kishore Prabhu will share with all of you that Brahma had Adharma and Mrisha. Mrisha is falsity. And they had Dambha and Maya, bluffing and illusion. They had Lobha and Nikriti, which is greed and cunning. They had Krodh and Himsa, which is anger and envy or violence. They had Mrityu and Bhiti, which is death and fear. And then they had Yatna and Niraya, which is excessive pain and hell. So if we were to summarize the growth of these adharmic qualities, and the root is irreligiousness, adharma. Not knowing the principles of dharma means that one follows false principles. So intimately connected with adharma is mrisha, which is falsity. So that is why adharma and mrisha married. Now, one who rejects true dharma and adopts the false principles is essentially fooling himself, bewildering himself and others. So from the combination of adharma and mrisha comes dambha. Dambha means bluffing, which means fooling one's own self and fooling others, and living in illusion, maya, considering that which is not real to be real. So these two attributes naturally take shelter of cruelty and inauspiciousness. So we had said that how Dambha and Maya were adopted by Nirti. So Nirti is cruelty and inauspiciousness. So inauspiciousness is looking for such places to flourish. Where it sees there is adharma and mrisha, where it sees there is dambha and maya, then Nriti adopts them. So inauspiciousness comes in those places. Now, in an illusion person who cheats himself and others, there appears greed, lobha. And in order to fulfill that greed appears cunning. So we see that from a combination of dambha and maya, bluffing and illusion, appears lobha and nikriti, which is greed and cunning. And a person who is greedy will use all possible means to attain others' wealth. So that is why greed and cunning, they go hand in hand and they marry each other. However, despite all the cunning, one's greed will never be satisfied. So the combination of cunning and greed results in krodha and himsa, anger and violence. So the person becomes envious. So enviousness is considered to be synonymous to violence because greed can never be satisfied. And unsatisfied greed results in anger. So that is why envy and anger, or krodh and himsa, they go hand in hand and thus they marry. Anger and envy result in quarrel and harsh speech. So they gave birth to Kali and Durukti. So whenever there is quarreling, harsh speech will be there. And Kali, as we mentioned, was also divisiveness. So a person with this mentality makes constant distinction between mine and yours, and this belongs to those that I favor, and they should not go to those that I do not favor. So there is Kali and Durukti that is produced. All these qualities are not conducive to spiritual emancipation. So the situation of a materially overwhelmed jiva is that of constant fear. So Kali and Durukti result in bhiti, which is fear. So there is fear of being attacked by other similarly minded people. There is fear of losing your ill-gotten gains. And ultimately, there is fear of mrityu, which takes away everything. So that is why bhiti and mrityu go hand in hand and they marry. Then this influence of adharma continues till after death. So even after mrityu, because of the adharmic activities, the person suffers from excessive pain. So material conception results in yatna before death and after death. And after death, it results in niraya. So niraya is hellish conditions. So yatna and niraya are the ultimate results of the root of adharma, that one suffers and attains hellish condition. So just as a child contains in itself the traces of all its ancestors, these qualities are also cumulative. So when we talk about yatna and niraya, they contain within themselves bhiti and mrityu. They contain within themselves Kali and Durukti, and Krodha and Himsa. Right? Because they're all the ancestors, the qualities are cumulatively growing. And this inbreeding, it indicates the insular nature of adharma. So what does inbreeding mean? Inbreeding means that one is not open to anything from that is outside their conception. So people who are strong materialists, they create their own paradigm and they stay within it. They refuse to consider anything outside it. So for them, anything new is simply a recombination of what is already there. Just like we see how constantly siblings are marrying with one another to create something new, in the same way, within the material paradigm, it is just the recombination and recycling. Srila Prabhupada would say that news is actually stale. There's nothing new in the news. Firstly, he says that it's about events that happened yesterday. So how can that be new? So from a technical perspective, it's not new. And secondly, those events, they themselves are stale. because the same events are happening over and over again. They're just being presented differently. So that's the nature of material world. Now, those who are spiritually inclined, they're open-minded. They consider both matter and spirit. They not only accept empirical, but they also accept inductive and descending forms of knowledge. They accept the material science as well as the spiritual science. And the end for them is happiness, liberation, and spiritual world. The end for the insular materialist is yatna and niraya, is a long, excessively painful material life ending in hellish conditions. Now, in the following chapters, we will see how both dharmic and adharmic qualities will be displayed. Okay, let's move on to the next verse, verse 5. Sangrena maya khyata pratisarga stavangaha trihi shrutvetat puman punyam vidunotyat manomalam. My dear Vidur, I have summarily explained the causes of devastation. One who hears this description 3 times attains piety and washes the sinful contamination from his soul. So Maitreya addresses Vidur as anaga or sinless to reassure him that he is not in the family of adharma, sin. Now, one may consider that the Bhagavad Puran, which is called the Amal Puran, which would speak about Krishna and Bhakti, why is it speaking about such things like incest and the lineage of adharma? So Vishwanath Chakravarti explains that one should understand both favorable and unfavorable elements of bhakti. The elements that cause one to end in hell, the attributes that are coming from the family of adharma, they have been described here so that one develops aversion to them. One recognizes them and stays clear of them in themselves and in others. So that's why Maitreya, he describes this as pratisarga. So pratisarga means destruction. Now generally pratisarga happens at the end of, depending on the nature of the pratisarga, it happens at the end of Brahma's day or at the end of Brahma's life. But here it's calling it pratisarga because really speaking, sarga or the creation of the material world is to allow for the conditioned jivas to return back to Godhead. However, those who adopt these qualities, they are destroying that purpose because they will not be able to go back to the spiritual world. They will continue to stay in the material world. So Maitreya is saying this is pratisarga. This is the cause of destruction. So simply speaking, what it means is that, as Prabhupada says, that one has not been able to take advantage of the human form of life. So they have just destroyed their valuable time. So this is pratisarga. Now, he says that description is purifying because it teaches one to avoid this. And he says, Maitreya says, hearing 3 times results in 2 things: cleansing of the heart and attainment of devotion. So Sridhar Swami comments that this description is not pure in itself, but because its effect is purifying, in the sense that it instills conviction in the heart to stay clear of the path of irreligion it is considered to be purifying. So just as Krishna Katha purifies, this also results in purification. So 3 times means that once you should hear it, once you should read it, and once you should speak it. So in this way, once a person has done all 3, then it builds conviction. So in Ishopanishad, there is this verse that talks about the glories of avidya, right? The verse 11, where it says, Vidyam cha yash tad vedobhyam sa avidyada mrityum tritva vidya amritam ashnute. That one should learn the process of nations and knowledge side by side. And only such a person can transcend the influence of birth and death. Right? And same position is made over there. Prabhupada explains that you should learn the process of nations to conquer it, to stay away from it. Okay, and then Prabhupada in the purport also, he draws this this development of one from another, which I have already explained to you. Prabhupada also, or rather, based on Prabhupada's purport, I have elaborated it. Okay, very good. Let's go on to verse 6. Atata kirtaye vamsham punnakirte kurudvaha swayambhuvasyapi mano hareramsham shajanmanaha. Maitreya continued, O best of the Kuru dynasty, I shall now describe to you the descendants of Swayambhuva Manu, who was born of a part of a plenary portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So after describing the dynasty of Adharma, Maitreya is now describing the pious dynasty of Swayambhuva Manu. So Swayambhuva Manu is the personification of piety. It is mentioned that he lives a very long life, right? We know he lives for 71 Chaturyugas. And it's mentioned that most of the time he spends in Krishna Katha. So embodiment of bhakti and piety. So Maitreya is now enthusiastically describing the dynasty, or continues to describe the dynasty of Swayambhuva Manu, and he's saying that his glory is Punya Kirtan. That it is something that results in complete piety. So he makes another point also. He says that from the lineage of Swayambhuva Manu comes Amsha Janmana. So Amsha means amshas of the personality of Godhead. So it means that they are amshas, they are produced of amshas, and they in turn produce amshas. So Swayambhuva Manu is an amsha, and then he produces amshas like Lord Kapila and Yagya and Prithu and Rishabh and Narnarayan, and they in turn are also amshas. So in the 12th canto of the Bhagavatam, 7th chapter, it is mentioned that in each reign of Manu, 6 types of personalities appear as amshas of the Lord. And these are the Manu himself, then Indra, then the sons of Manu, then the great sages, and the principal demigods. So these are all the partial incarnations of the personality of Godhead. Now, Amshas, they are considered in the sense that they are jivas, but they are empowered jivas. So they are not Vishnu Tattva, right? So we know that there is, Krishna said, Mameva Amsha Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, right? So they are Amshas in that way, they're Jiva Tattvas, but essentially they are empowered with the ruling potency. So Srila Prabhupada says that the great sage Maitreya is now going to explain about the descendants of this Manu, all of whom are widely celebrated for their pious activities, Punya Kirta. Before speaking of these pious descendants, Maitreya has already described the descendants of the impious activities, representing anger, envy, unpalatable speech, quarrel, fear, and death. Purposely, therefore, he is next relating the history of the life of Dhruva Maharaj, the most pious king within this universe. Okay, next verse 7. Priyavarta totan padau Shatrupa pate sutau Vasudevasya kalaya Rakshayam jagata stitau. Swayambhu Manu had two sons by his wife Shatrupa, and the names of the sons were Utanpad and Priyavarta. Because both of them were descendants of a plenary portion of Vasudeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they were very competent to rule the universe, to maintain and protect the citizens. The Prabhupada says that these two kings, Utanpad and Priyavrata, were specifically empowered by the personality of Godhead, unlike the great king Rishabha, who was the personality of Godhead himself. Prabhupada is making a distinction. The king Rishabha, he was Vishnu Tattva, he was the personality of Godhead himself. Utanpad and Priyavrata, they were Shakti Avesh, Saptar. They are known as Vasudevasya Kalaya, which means that they were born of the expansion of the Lord. So Swayambhu Manu is considered to be the expansion, Vasudevasya, and they are born of the expansion of the Lord. They themselves were expansions of the Lord, and they also produced expansions of the Lord. And collectively, they represent the Bhumi Palanya Kala, the ruling potency of the Lord. Next verse 8. Jaye utan padasya sunati suruchastayo suruchi preyasi patyo netarayat suto dhruvaha. King Utanpad had two queens named Suniti and Suruchi. Suruchi was more dear to the king. Suniti, who had a son named Dhruva, was not his favorite. So now Maitreya begins to describe the lineage of King Utanpad. So even though Utanpad is the younger brother, Maitreya is first describing his lineage for two reasons. One is that Priyavrata, he did not marry to begin with because he was inclined to devotional service. So he renounced his throne and went to the forest. So Utanpad was the one who first carried forth the dynasty, and Maitreya's attention goes there. Also, it is said that because Maitreya was eager to talk about the glorious pastimes of Dhruva Maharaj, so his attention first goes to Utanpad. So we see this, that the speakers themselves are elevated devotees, and even though they are trying to speak dispassionately, but their bhakti comes forth. So Maitreya, earlier on, he spoke about the daughters of Swayambhu Manu because he wanted to speak about Lord Kapila. He wanted to speak about Lord Yajna. So his attention went first to the daughters, even though generally the sons are spoken of first. Now when he's speaking about the sons, his attention goes to Dhruva. And so he speaks about Utanpad. We see that in Sukdev Goswami also, that many incidents he summarizes very in a very concise way. In many incidents, he speaks with great details. Right? See, he summarizes the whole Ramayana in 2 chapters. In the 9th canto, we see chapter 10 and 11. He summarizes in just 2 cantos. But we see that how he spends so many verses describing the Vaikuntha planet, describing Shivaloka, describing Dwarka, describing Hastinapur, because Krishna is there. Right? In the 10th canto, he kind of teases Parikshit Maharaj by speaking 1 verse about Krishna. The very first verse, he speaks about Krishna and stops. And then Parikshit Maharaj expresses his eagerness. I want to hear more about Krishna. And then with great relish, he begins to speak in details. So here, Maitreya is now speaking about Utanpad. That Utanpad had 2 queens named Suniti and Suruchi. So Suniti had a son named Dhruva, and she was the elder wife rather. And Suruchi had a son by the name of Uttam. So Suniti was not very dear to the king. The younger wife, Suruchi, however, was very dear to the king. This shows the Prithakdrasha, the divisive mentality of the king, and the fact that he was not properly situated. He should not have made this distinction. So even though it's not mentioned in the Bhagavatam, but in the Shiv Puran, it is mentioned that Suniti is the daughter of Dharma, Yamraj. So the Dhruva pastime is also described in Shiv Puran briefly over there. And there are some differences between some of the details. But there it is mentioned that Suniti is the daughter of Dharma. So, so while these pastimes are factual, but there is also some level of perhaps an allegorical concept that people do not like niti, but they like ruchi. So niti is following rules and regulations, and ruchi is enjoying. So people don't like prescriptions. They want to eat whatever they want to act whatever they want, and so they have a preference for ruchi. However, the result of following niti is dhruva. So dhruva means firm determination. That's the result of following niti. Prabhupada gives a second reason in the purport. He says that the great sage Maitreya wanted to describe the pious activities of the kings. Priyavat was the first son of Swambhu Manu and Utanpad was the second son. But the great sage Maitreya immediately began to speak of Dhruva Maharaj, the son of Utanpad, because Maitreya was very eager to describe pious activities. The incidents in the life of Dhruva Maharaj are very attractive for devotees. Later on, he says, by hearing the activities of pious Dhruva, one can enhance one's faith in God and can directly connect with the personality of Godhead. And thus one can very soon be elevated to the transcendental platform of devotional service. So Prabhupada said this is another reason why Maitreya spoke, because this pastime has the potency of inspiring one to also become elevated in spirituality. Okay, we'll do a couple of more verses, and then after that we'll pause for discussion. Verse 9. Ekada suruche putram ankam aropya lalayan uttamam narurukshantam dhruvam raja bhayandata. Once upon a time, Ekada means once upon a time, King Uttanpad was patting the son of Suruchi, Uttam, placing him on his lap. Dhruva Maharaj was also trying to get on the king's lap, but the king did not very much welcome him. So once upon a time, the king was sitting on the throne and placing Uttam on his lap. He began to lalayan. So lalayan is, as Prabhupada says, caressing, kissing, hugging. So it's the loving exchange between the father and the son. So Maitreya is addressing Uttam as Suruchi Putram. Even though he was also the son of Uttanpad. So he is displaying some kind of a cynical humor over here, which follows the divisive mentality of the king. Because he will be distinguishing between his own sons because of their mothers. He's not going to be thinking that both Dhruva and Uttam are my sons, but he will be identifying them as the son of Suruchi and the son of Suniti. So Maitreya is sarcastically calling Uttam as Suruchi Putra. The feeling in him is that he is the son of my favorite wife, and therefore this is my favorite son. So at that time, Dhruv also developed a desire to play on the lap of his father. So Uttam is the younger brother. So when he saw his younger brother playing, he also tried to get onto the lap of his father. The king was watching this, but out of fear of Suruchi, he did not take Dhruva on his lap. It says, Na abhiyandata, that he did not welcome, which means that Dhruv was trying. He was a 5-year-old, so he was trying, but the king did not push him away, but did nothing to welcome. So when the child is trying to get into the father's lap, the father will bend down, take the child up, extend the hand, let the child catch the hand. So he was watching, but he was not making any attempts to reciprocate. Why? Because of fear of Suruchi, which indicates that the king was very much controlled by his wife, which is another way of saying that the king was very much controlled by his lusty desires. So the reason for this is explained in the next verse. After that, we pause for discussion. Tatha chikir samanam tam sapatnya stanyam dhruvam suruchi shanvato rajya shresham ahati garvita. While the child Dhruva Maharaj was trying to get on the lap of his father, Suruchi, his stepmother, became very envious of the child. And with great pride, she began to speak so as to be heard by the king himself. So we had just read about the various adharmic qualities, right? We had heard about durukti, which is harsh speech. We had heard about envy. We had heard about anger. So we see all those qualities are now being displayed in this pastime. So Suruchi, on seeing the attempts of Dhruva to get onto his father's lap, she begins to speak. So she considers him as Chikrishamanam Sapatniya, that this boy is the Sapatniya, means my co-wife. Sapatniya becomes South. So South means co-wife. So this is the son of my co-wife. So this is her divisive mentality, because as per Vedic principles, Dhruva is also her child, because he is born of her husband, and his mother is his co-wife. So we see in Ramayana, except for the transgression of Kekai, all the mothers were equally affectionate towards all the sons. They did not make this distinction that this son belongs to me, this son does not belong to me. But here we see that Suniti, she has that prathak drisha, the divisive mentality. She speaks with envy and pride. So generally, in front of a superior, one does not display one's pride or envy. One maintains a more humble and controlled position. But Maitreya is saying that she spoke with envy and pride to indicate that Suruchi was confident of her position as being favored by the king. So just like a servant, if he is favored by the master, becomes impudent, because he knows I'm favored by my master, so he can argue, he can act in an inappropriate way. So similarly, Suruchi was so confident that her husband, who has a superior position to her, is controlled by her. She displays this openly pride and envy in front of him. Now, the envy in her is because she's aware of the position of Dhruva as the elder son. So he is first in the line to the throne, not Uttam. So she is envious of Dhruva. Otherwise, as a child, there's no reason for the mother to be envious, even the stepmother. But she's envious because Dhruva is older. He's the eldest son. So it is said that when people in the kingdom would sometimes address Dhruva as prince, then Suruchi would get angry at them, saying that he is not the prince. He is the son of the king, but not of the queen. So the point she would make is that, the kings have many liaisons. They have liaisons with maids. They have liaisons with women of lesser status. And while the sons belong to the royal dynasty, they are not considered to be the progenitors. They're not considered, not the primogenitors, which means they don't have any primary claim on the father's wealth. So she would say, Suruchi is just another woman. Suniti is just another woman that my husband has relationship with, but I'm the king, I'm the queen, and my son is the prince. But despite that saying, in her heart she knew that Dhruva is the eldest son, so she had envy. And she had pride because of her position with respect to the king. She knew that the king was infatuated by her charms and youth, and she was proud that she controlled him. So with this mentality, with envy in the heart and pride in her mind, she will now begin to speak. Srila Prabhupada in the purport says that the king was equally affectionate towards both his sons, Uttam and Dhruva. So he had a natural inclination to take Dhruva as well as Uttam on his lap. But because of his favoritism towards his king Suruchi, he could not welcome Dhruva Maharaj, despite his feelings. King Uttanpad's feeling was understood by Suruchi, and therefore with great pride, she began to speak. So Prabhupada gives this understanding that Suruchi knew that King Uttanpad also loved Dhruva as much as he loved Uttam. But despite that, he was not in a position to take Dhruva on his lap because he was scared of her. So Suruchi developed pride that I am in this position, that the king is scared of me. Prabhupada says this is the nature of woman. If a woman understands that her husband regards her as a favorite and is especially affectionate to her, she takes undue advantage. These symptoms are visible even in such elevated society as the family of Sambhav. Therefore, it is concluded that feminine nature of woman is present everywhere. So at this time, Suruchi did not have the devotion that will be found in Suniti. Prabhupada says that this feminine nature of woman is present everywhere, indicating that even in great personalities, this feminine nature is found. So not just woman, but he's saying this feminine nature of woman is found everywhere. So this feminine nature, which over here is being attributed to pride and envy, is found even in great personalities like Uttanapad. So as the father, it was his duty to be equally affectionate to both his sons. But due to having passions for Suruchi, he neglected his duty. The weakness of Uttanapad became the strength of Suruchi. So when Prabhupada says this feminine nature of woman is present everywhere, we can see that in Ramayana and Maharaj Dashrath also. And Maharaj Dashrath had excessive affection for Kekai, which made him weak. And that became the strength of Kekai. Then similarly, Kekai had a lot of affection for Manthara. And that became the weakness of Kekai and the strength of Manthara. So some of the commentators on Ramayana says that Ravan was killed because of a humpbacked Dasi. Right? They say it more in comedy. But ultimately, the chain of events was that Manthara influenced Kekai, Kekai influenced Dashrath, Ram left, and then the chain of events happened. So the duty of the king is to control bad qualities. Now we see that in Suruchi, there is pride, there is envy, there is hatred, and then there is drupti, there is harsh speech. Right? And envy is causeless. That there was no reason for Suruchi to envy Dhruva. But envy is appearing, pride is appearing, hatred, anger, harsh speech, all these qualities are appearing. Uttanapad, as the king, his duty is to control these bad qualities. But because he himself has bad qualities, predominantly that of lust, he is becoming controlled by the bad qualities of Suruchi. Instead of him controlling bad qualities, he is becoming controlled by bad qualities. So the point that is made is that the nature of these bad qualities is that they breed amongst one another. If you look at it in an isolated perspective, Uttanapad had only one bad quality, which is that of lust. But because the nature of this quality is that they breed amongst one another, his lust became, because of lust, he became controlled by Suruchi. And so he also inherited her bad qualities of pride and envy and hatred and harsh speech. So we'll pause over here and see if there is any comments or discussion.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. These sons and daughters of Brahma are representing the bad qualities. They are like analogies as well, no?
They are not analogies, because when we studied in the third canto the creation of the universe, then there it is explained initially by Maitreya and then later on by Lord Kapila, that the first thing that Brahma does when he creates the universe is he creates nations. So what does it mean when he creates nations? So just like when he creates piety, he's creating personalities who manifest the qualities of piousness. Like he creates Narad Muni, who shows bhakti. Narad Muni is not a metaphor. He's an individual, right? He's a personality. It happens that he manifests bhakti. And the Chatur Kumars, Gyan, right? They're not metaphors. They're real people, and they manifest that quality. So similarly, these personalities, they're Adharma and Nrisha and Nirti, they're real qualities, real people, and the qualities were named after them. So, like if I can give you an example, even in the current day, if you go and you kind of want to make a copy of a document, then you say that, can you Xerox this document? Okay. So what is Xerox? Xerox it's a company, right? It's a company that produced the first photostatic machine, photocopying machines, right? And photocopying became a synonym for Xerox. Now, later on, somebody might say that, was Xerox really a company, or was it a notion? Because Xeroxing means photocopying. And how do we understand that there was a company that was Xerox? Or, people say that Google this. And now, we have seen Google come in our own lifetime, but fast forward 100 years, and Google becomes a dictionary. It becomes a verb to search. And then somebody said there was a company called Google. I said, no, was there really a company called Google? Why would they call themselves Google then? How did they know that Google would be search? Right. So in our present vernacular, these qualities are there with this particular name because they descended from these personalities. It's not the other way around. It's not that these persons are metaphors for these qualities. It's that these qualities have inherited the names of the people who manifested.
That means they are like deities of those qualities.
They are like the deities. Yes, that is correct.
Maybe I use the wrong word, metaphor. Should be deity.
Yes, I agree. Let me continue then, verse 11. Navats nripater dishnyan bhavanarodham arhati nagrito mayayattvama kukshavapi nirpatmajah. Queen Suruchi told Dhruva Maharaj, my dear child, you do not deserve to sit on the throne or on the lap of the king. Surely, you are also the son of the king. But because you did not take birth from my womb, you are not qualified to sit on the father's lap. So Suruchi here is saying that why Dhruva is not qualified to sit on the lap of Utanpa. So he is saying that you cannot sit there though you are the son of the king. But because you were not born Kuksha. So Kuksha contextually is translated as womb, but kuksha actually means belly, right? So when we apply the tilak, right, we say, forget but the first, second, third, the fourth tilak that we apply is kuksha, which means to the belly. And Suruchi is saying because Dhruva is a child, it is beyond his comprehension to understand what a womb means, and etc. So it's like mothers say to children that you're born from my stomach. So she's saying that you're not born from my stomach. You cannot sit there because you're not born from my stomach. And then Nripater Dishnayam, not on the throne of the king. Now, Dhruva was not trying to sit on the throne. He was just trying to sit on the lap of his father. However, this shows the mentality of Suruchi. She was conscious that by the rule of primogeniture, Dhruva was the successor to the throne of Uttanpad and not her son Uttam. So she also wants to impress, and this is more for the benefit of Uttanpad, that Dhruva is not qualified to sit on the throne. My son is qualified. And to Dhruva, she is saying that you're not qualified to sit on the lap of your father. That's what Dhruva wanted. He didn't want the throne at this point. He just wanted the lap. So Dhruva might say that, but I'm the son of the king, therefore I have the right to sit on the lap. And Suruchi says, Api Nripa Atmaja, that I know that you're born of the king, Atmaja, but you did not take birth from my abdomen. She says that Vishnum Cha, she says that did not take birth from my belly, right? Yeah, so that the Tilak mantra is Vishnum Cha Dakshane Kaksho, right? We say Bhahum Cha Madhusudanam, Vishnum Cha Dakshane Kaksho. May Vishnu protect the east side of my belly. So, since you did not take birth from Maya Kuksha, you are not qualified. So, in this way, Suruchi is also denying the position of Suniti. So, she is saying that you're the son of the king, but not all the women who bear children to the king, the children are not qualified to sit on the throne. I am the only real queen of the king, and because you did not take birth from me, you are not qualified. Flipping it around, what it means that only the son who has taken birth from me is qualified to sit on the lap of the king and on the throne. She addresses Dhruva as Vatsa. Vatsa means my dear child, and then speaks to him harshly. So this is the nature of envy, that there is no need to be envious to a small child, but she speaks harshly to him more because he represents Suruchi. He represents Suniti, and that's the main reason that she's speaking harshly to him. Hang on, verse 12. Balosi vatanatmanam annasrigarva sambratam nunam veda bhavanyasya durlabe rathe manorataha. My dear child, you are unaware that you are not born of my womb, but of another womb. Therefore, you should know that your attempt is doomed to fail. You're trying to fulfill a desire which is impossible to fulfill. So Suruchi is indicating that the reason she is stating the obvious is because Dhruva is a child. So she says Bala Asi. That even though everybody knows it, but because you're a child, so she says Bala Asi, but however, that because you're a child, I'm explaining to you this fact. So Bala also means foolish. So Suruchi is also saying that you're foolish, that you don't know this simple fact, that he should not consider that his mother is at the same stature as me. Right? So if you consider me and Suniti to be at the same stature, you are immature and foolish. And similarly, if you consider yourself to be at the same stature as Uttama, then that is also immature. So she's saying, as a child, you don't know enough to make this distinction, so I'm explaining them to you. And Prabhupada says that the small child Dhrumaraj was naturally affectionate towards his father, and he did not know that there was a distinction between his two mothers. So Dhruva considered both to be his mother. He didn't make a distinction that she is my stepmother. Now, Prabhupada says this distinction was pointed out by Queen Suruchi, who informed him that since he was a child, he did not understand the distinction between the two queens. This is another statement of Queen Suruchi's pride. Now, Dhruva may insist that despite all this, he still wants to sit on the lap of his father. So what is the solution to that? So Suruchi says that there is no way that in your present situation, can you ever sit on the lap of the king? Right? So she's completely closing the door to any discussion there. So Dhruva might say that there is no way that I can sit on the lap of my father. And Suruchi says, yes, there is one way. You should die. After you die, you take birth from my womb. Then you can sit on the lap of your father. So she says, Durlabhe rate manoratha. That this desire of yours, manorath, is very, very difficult to get. And this pierces the heart of Dhruva. So it is this statement that in Kshatriya spirit, Dhruva resolves to sit on a throne that is greater than his father, greater than his father's father, and greater than his father's father's father. So the nature of children is that they absorb good and bad qualities of those around them. And we see that Dhruv, he absorbs the arrogance and pride being displayed by Suruchi. So Suruchi is saying that only way you can sit on this throne is if you die and take birth in my womb. And Dhruv is absorbing the same arrogance and pride and saying that, and will say that forget about me dying in this very birth and forget about this throne of my father. I will sit in a throne that is greater than his father, which is Swayambhuva Manu, and that is greater than his father's father, which is Lord Brahma. Now, fortunately, that is not the only influence that Dhruv has. He also has the influence of Suniti, and he has the mercy of Narad Muni, which prevents him from completely declining. Verse 13. Tapashadhya purusham tasyeva me garbe tvam sadhyatmanam yadichhasi nirpashanam. If you at all desire to rise to the throne of the king, then you have to undergo severe austerities. First of all, you must satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan. And then, when you're favored by him because of your worship, you shall have to take birth from my womb. So, Dhruva may ask, how can I take birth from your womb if I'm already here? After all, he's a child. So he says, I'm already here. How can I take birth from your womb? So Suruchi says that my womb is so exalted that only a great devotee of the Lord can appear in my womb. So just by you dying, you cannot take birth in my womb. Before dying, you have to purify yourself. Right now, you're contaminated by your birth from Suniti. So first, you have to purify yourself by satisfying the personality of Godhead. And when you get the benediction of the personality of Godhead, his greatest benediction to you is to give you an opportunity to take birth in my womb. So this shows the extreme pride of Suruchi. That even, she's saying that even the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot make you sit on the throne or the lap of your father. Even he has to take help from me. So if he becomes pleased by the austerities that you perform, and he gives you this benediction that now you can sit on the lap of your father, it has to be done by you taking birth in my womb, which means the personality of Godhead has to take my help to give you this benediction. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that her talk is also to show to the king that she has devotion, even though she is not a devotee. She is directing Dhruva to perform Aradhya Purusham, devotional service, by tapasa, by performing austerities, which was the recommended practice in Satyuga. But for a material purpose, that he dies, he takes birth in a womb, yadi ichhasi nipashanam, and then his desire to sit on the throne of the king will be fulfilled. Now, actually speaking, Suruchi does not want Dhruv to take birth in her womb. She's speaking sarcastically over here, or she's speaking with cynicism. And first of all, she's establishing her exalted position before Dhruv. And then she's thinking that even if Dhruv follows through my recommendation, and then he goes and he tries to perform these paths, he will probably perish in that path. So one less thing for me to worry about. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that what Suruchi is actually hoping, that satisfying the Lord, you should die quickly. Then I shall see your mother weeping. Then may you and I be happy. So this is the vitiated consciousness of Suruchi. So Dhruva would be happy because he gets Suruchi as his mother and can now sit on the lap of his father. Suruchi would be happy because she would see her co-wife first in the agony of separation from the child, and then continue to be in a degraded position. Now, ironically, this is exactly what Dhruva does. What Suruchi is saying, this is exactly what Dhruva does. But Suruchi does not understand the power of Bhakti. That because of Bhakti, Dhruva in that very body becomes not only qualified to sit on the throne of his father, but eventually gets a position much more elevated than his father. So even though Suruchi is speaking with envy and contempt, the acharyas say that she is the Shiksha Guru of Dhruva. And this point will be made by Suniti also later on, because unknowingly she is giving the highest instruction to Dhruva. Prabhupada says that Suruchi is so envious of Dhruva Maharaj that she indirectly asks him to change his body. According to her, first of all, he had to die, then take his next body in her womb, and then only it would be possible for Dhruva Maharaj to ascend to the throne of his father. Okay. So we'll do a couple of more verses and then we'll pause for any discussion. Maitre vacha matu sapatanya sadurukhi vidha swasanrushadan hato yathahi hetva mishantam pitram sanvacham jagam matu prarudan sakasham. The sage Maitre continued, my dear Vidur, as a snake when stuck by a stick breathes very heavily, Dhruva Maharaj, having been stuck by the strong words of his stepmother, began to breathe very heavily because of great anger. When he saw that his father was silent and did not protest, he immediately left the palace and went to his mother. So, Matu Sapatanya. So, now Dhruva is making this distinction. So, my mother's co-wife, Matu Sapatanya, that now Dhruva is saying that my mother's co-wife, he is no longer identifying her as his own mother, Sa Durukti. So, Durukti is, as we had said, harsh speech. Swasam Rusha Dandharto. He became agitated like an angry snake. And what was his father doing? Vishantam. Simply watching. And Pitram, Shanavacham. Vachan means speaking, Shanavacham means not speaking. So he observed this and Jagama Matu Parudan Sakasham, that he went to his mother weeping. So these verses are describing the reactions of Dhruva. So even though he was just 5 years old, he understood that Suruchi was calling her mother fallen and was calling him unqualified. So he became angry like a snake that was hit by a rod. And the anger was followed by lamentation. Why? Because in anger, he looked at his father. That look what she is saying. Now you should protect me. It's the nature of a child to take protection of the father, especially when he's been wronged. When children are playing, they don't care that much. But when some other friend takes away a toy, then the child will come running to the father or the mother. In this case, because the mother was the culprit. So the child will come running to the father saying, he's taken my toy, get me back my toy. Because naturally, they take shelter of their father. So Dhruva, in anger, he looks at his father for support. But Pitram Shanavacham, that he does not speak anything. Fine, he was not speaking anything, but was he angrily looking at Suruchi? No, Mishantam. He was passively watching, which meant that he was showing his implicit approval of Suruchi publicly insulting Dhruva and his mother. So now the anger of Dhruva becomes strong lamentation. Now, one point to note over here is that in our own lives, all our practices, sadhana, jap, etc., are tested by the nature of our spontaneous responses in unprecedented situations. In situations that we are planning for or we are prepared for, we can control our responses. But in unprecedented situation, the responses are not curated, they're spontaneous. Like in Bhagavad Gita 8th chapter, Krishna says, right? At the time of death, unprecedented situation, one cannot act in a way that is different from their nature. So Uttanpad, he was tarnished with his feelings of Suruchi. And in the spur of the moment, he was frozen. He did not speak. Right? So that is his spontaneous reaction. The lack of reaction is a spontaneous reaction to this unprecedented situation. That right in front of him, Suruchi is insulting his son and his first wife. But because he was contaminated with lust, his spontaneous reaction was to do nothing. Later on, we will see that how Uttanpad shows very strong affection for Dhruva and how he becomes morose at Dhruva leaving. However, his infatuation with Suruchi forced him to keep quiet. So this ability to spontaneously react in an appropriate way is the result of matured, prolonged practices. So as devotees, that's what we do. Our sadhana is that when we are in unprecedented situation, our spontaneous reaction is taking shelter of Krishna. That if you're driving and suddenly there's a car that comes in front of us, what is a spontaneous reaction? That our mind, without prior thought, without meditation, it immediately takes shelter of Krishna. Okay, so this is what the athletes call muscle memory. That after they practice and practice and practice, then their body acts even without the mind knowing. Because things are happening so quickly, if the signal went to the mind processed it and then came back, then it would be too late. So the athletes, they practice over and over again so that it just becomes muscle memory. The body reacts instinctively. And that's what we do. We practice, we do sadhana, we do jap, we do deity worship. All this practice that we do is so that our spontaneous reactions are always leaning towards our spiritual perspective. Okay, so let me pause over here. After this is the conversation between Dhruva and Suniti. So we can take that in our next week's discussion. And now we can pause and see if there is any comments or discussion.
Krishna Prabhuji. Prabhuji, sometimes we see that you were talking about the reaction and, how prolonged the practice is, the correlation between that. Sometimes we see that, non-devotees have better responses than devotees in situations. So, does that mean that they're more matured or more...
So what does better reaction mean?
Better in the sense, devotees might... or at least I can say for my personal thing, I might not react in the most sattvic way. I might get into the modes, lower modes, and react in a more passionate way versus some of my friends who are not devotees. Like, for example, if I say, for example, if I lost my job or something like that, right? Like in an adverse situation, my first reaction would be I would be depressed, and but somebody else in the same situation who might not be practicing might have a better reaction. Or
it does. I would agree with you that the result of mature spiritual practices is that one tends to take more and more shelter of Krishna. And that essentially means to more equanimity. Now, people who are not devotees may display more equanimity as a symptom or mode of goodness, it may not necessarily mean a sign of devotion, right? The Brahmanical qualities, that of staying equipoised in adversity. So it's more of a material quality. That's that quality of equanimity. So it does not necessarily mean that they are more spiritually advanced, but it does mean that they're more strongly in the mode of goodness. Bhakti, as you know, it accepts all modes. So whether we are in the mode of passion or goodness or ignorance, we can execute bhakti. So that's why we can see this. We can see this distinction. Daksha demonstrates bhakti in the mode of ignorance, right? Devotee, nevertheless, like he's having darshan of Lord Vishnu, but we see how he's reacting with pride and anger. But nevertheless, there is devotion in him. Compare that with some other personalities who may not have devotion but have more equanimity in them. So more advanced in the modes, not necessarily meaning that more advanced in bhakti. However, the original statement that you made, it still stands with me. I think I would agree with it that as we make more advancements in devotion, then the expectation would be that we would demonstrate more qualities that reflect sattvic gunas.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. One thing that is, I was thinking in the last point that you made, the more we do perform sadhana, the more spiritual inclinations will become spontaneous, or no, we will probably go towards that. So that is very different for different people. Some people have to do years and years and years of sadhana, but some people not necessarily that much of that many number of years. So what is it? Is it because of the purva vasana that we carry, the karma reactions we carry, that's what's causing? Or because especially for initiated devotees, how do we understand that?
Yes, could be, because we are continuing bhakti from our previous lives. So there are some devotees who made a lot of advancement and they're picking up from that point onwards. Some of them are starting from an earlier point. So even though it said like, seniority amongst devotees is predicated on 3 factors: on your age, on your initiation, how long you have been initiated, and on your realizations. Right? They said these 3 factors. So generally, age means that you respect a devotee who's elder to you, regardless of anything else, just because of age, the formality of the age. Initiation indicates how early the person took to the process. One who's initiated soon, earlier, is considered to be senior. Now it's not that much, but earlier on, especially in Prabhupada's time, this date of initiation was very, very strongly observed. A devotee would be considered senior. Person was initiated a day before the other day, and he would get the right to basically chastise or correct the other devotee. And the third, which is realization, that basically includes the point that you were alluding to, that a person is advanced in realization based on One is how quickly or sincerely they're taking to bhakti in this life, and also the kind of advancement that they made in their previous life. So, so based on that, some devotees mature very quickly, some devotees take their time.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So we'll end over here. Vanchakalpatarubhayashchit kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thai Gaur Premanande. Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.